So that was about the US and India. During his campaign days, the US president promised to restore America's world domination. Part of his plan was closer ties with Russia and China, but not without a little muscle flexing. So as Trump works towards his America First promise, he continues to face the heat of the election meddling probe, a national security strategy that is critical of Kremlin, that could change the rules of engagement. Why is the president now changing tacks? Here's a report.
Donald Trump is a president under pressure. The investigation into Russia's alleged meddling during the 2016 polls has made significant progress. While the US president has denied all allegations, he was perhaps one of the most vocal proponents of better ties with Russia. But when President Trump took to the stage to detail his government's national security plan, he chose to call Russia a rival.
We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth. We will attempt to build a great partnership with those and other countries, but in a manner that always protects our national interest.
Trump's changed tune is a reflection of the global sentiment against Russia. From the US election to the shock Brexit vote and the Catalan crisis, recent events have made governments around the world skeptical of Russia. While Trump chose his words carefully during the address, the full report published on the White House website used harsh words against the Kremlin. It says, today actors such as Russia are using information tools in an attempt to undermine the legitimacy of democracies. Adversaries target media, political processes, financial networks, and personal data. The American public and private sectors must recognize this and work together to defend our way of life. Unquote. Previous presidents have released their national security plans with little fanfare, but for President Trump, the occasion was all about advancing his America First mission. While the US president has been watchful of what he says in public about Russia, the critical report reflects what those within the administration feel about Moscow. Bureau Report, WION.
And joining us this evening from California is Stephen Golub, international affairs expert. Stephen, good evening and good to have you on the show. What's going on? One moment Donald Trump goes gaga over Vladimir Putin. The next he accuses him of domestic meddling in other countries.
Yes, good point. I think with respect to this latest statement by President Trump, actions speak louder than words. And his administration has taken no action to limit Russian interference with U.S. elections in the future. In fact, they've quite stymied that action. He's been quite strong in accusing the Mueller investigation of being, in effect, a witch hunt. So while this latest new strategy, as it were, is interesting in some ways, let's see how it plays out in practice. So far in the days and in the past year, of almost a year of his administration leading up to this statement, he really has done nothing to take action to try to stop Russian electoral interference in the U.S., and even has tried to block investigations into that. So I would take this statement with a big grain of salt.
Is the vision document or the security strategy paper, whatever it is called, a smokescreen to soften the media and public glare on the Russia meddling probe? Or is the deep state forcing Trump's hand when it comes to policy matters? He may make pronouncements otherwise on Twitter and during press conferences, but when it comes to policy, he has to toe a line.
Well, that's one plausible explanation, with the exception of the term the deep state, which I'll push back against. I think that's a term that's used when anti-democratic forces are trying to undermine a democracy, and the classic case in recent years has been Egypt. What you have here are legitimate democratic and rule of law institutions in some ways reining in a president's authoritarian streak. Getting back to the point at hand, certainly cooler heads may be prevailing in this statement by President Trump, but I'd be very cautious about seeing whether he actually takes action going forward in terms of Russia's efforts to undermine democracy in the U.S. or around the world. As I've said, so far his actions have been anything but that.
Sunday's call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin was the second in 4 days. On Thursday, I believe, they spoke to each other after Trump heard about Putin praising America's economy and he called back to thank him. And that is what fuels headlines like, and I'm quoting, Trump and Putin closer than ever. So I go back to the question, what is their status in the age of Facebook? Would it be complicated?
It's not completely clear what the status of the relationship is, and as you're reporting and as you've indicated, there are multiple sides to this, and there's a lot of ambiguity to this. On the one hand, accusing Russia of these serious actions around the world. On the other hand, being so buddy-buddy with Putin, despite the fact that Putin threatens American interests, threatens democratic interests, I would say threatens some of India's interests in the region and around the world. So it's an ambiguous relationship, and hanging all over this, as always, is the big question of why he bends over backwards so far to remain friends with Putin, despite Putin's actions in other countries and despite Putin's actions in the U.S., which have been very well verified by our intelligence agencies.
Right. Stephen, I'll have to leave it at that. And we'll wait to hear from the White House and the U.S. President on where things stand between America and Russia. Meanwhile, despite the American president's personal touch, ties between Russia and the United States are at an all-time low. Back in August, President Trump signed into law fresh sanctions against Russia. Kremlin saw this as a full-scale trade war. The repercussions, though, went far beyond trade. The sanctions sparked off a diplomatic war. Russia asked America to cut its diplomatic staff by 755 people. A compound being used by the American diplomats there was seized. It did not stop there. In retaliation, the U.S. ordered Russia to close its diplomatic offices in San Francisco, New York, and Washington. America also cut back its visa services in Russia. After Moscow decided to intervene in the Syrian conflict, its diplomatic, military, and intelligence ties with the U.S. have suffered. While President Trump blamed the U.S. Congress for damaging ties with Russia, there are several parties in Washington that are keen to launch a larger diplomatic offensive in retaliation to the meddling by the Russian agents, and prominent among them is the intelligence establishment. The question then, how will all of this impact the Russia probe? Will it impact the Russia probe at all? Look at the facts. There are two major investigations underway right now. The first is being led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller for the U.S. Department of Justice. This is the most high-profile investigation as Mueller took over from FBI Director James Comey, who was fired by President Trump in May. This investigation can lead to prosecution of those who are found guilty. The second investigation is being conducted by committees within the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. These are small investigations that collectively form the second part of the probe. They may bring new information to light, but those who are found guilty will not be prosecuted by these committees. They can still be damaging, though. They have the potential to kickstart the impeachment process against the president. Both of these investigations are independent, and they're unlikely to be affected by foreign policy changes. Essentially, what Donald Trump says verbally, in policy documents or on Twitter about Russia is unlikely to affect the election meddling investigation.